sometimes clients will say, should I lease or should I buy? If you're old enough like me, you always heard from your parents, you don't want to pay rent, you want to own your house. You want to build equity, you want the tax advantages. It makes a lot more sense to own rather than lease. We hear a lot from our clients as well, but let's take a minute and kind of understand the differences of leasing versus owning. First thing that I think you need to consider is what's it actually going to cost you? Real dollars. So if you're in a typical northeastern market where 2,000 feet of space is going to cost you $5,000 a month in rent, I would say to you, if it's going to cost you $10,000 a month in ownership, it'll probably never make sense. How can you be competitive with the competition paying double what you should be paying? So when doing the analysis, it's easy to say, sure, it makes more sense to own. I have a huge amount of money invested in the infrastructure. I'm probably not going to leave. It probably makes a lot more sense to own. I never have to worry about losing my lease. And there's other arguments that we can clearly make on your behalf. But I think the first thing to look at is what is it going to cost to own versus lease. And you need to understand that there's not just the mortgage and the money you borrow from the bank, but what are the real estate taxes? What are the operating expenses to run the property? And you need to add all that up and compare that as to what a lease would cost and look at that over the next 10, 15, 20 years. When you purchase real estate, the mortgage interest is deductible, similar to the way it is when you buy a home or a condominium. It's a small incentive, but in addition to the mortgage interest being deductible, when you file your taxes at the end of the year, if you own the real estate, you depreciate the real estate. So there are some tax benefit to ownership that you have to factor into the equation, but you can't let that outweigh what your overall costs are going to be. The other thing to consider is you're going to build equity by owning the real estate. So at the end of 20 or 25 years, in most cases, assuming you haven't refinanced too many times, you're actually going to own the real estate free and clear. Whereas if you simply pay rent, you're just going to pay rent, and when the lease expires, you're not going to have that money. So there can be some theoretical benefits to ownership over leasing. And there needs to be an analysis put together to understand what makes the most sense. The other thing to keep in mind is there are many markets where ownership may not be a viable option. If you're in Midtown Manhattan and you're looking for retail, visible real estate to own and operate and run a 2,000 square foot dental office, very, very difficult to make that happen. If you can find such a space, in my opinion, it would be cost prohibitive. So the market where you are and the cost is an important part of this equation. The other thing to consider is, are you looking for retail or are you looking for office? Almost every market will have an affordable office condominium option. But if you're a general practitioner dentist, you're not, and you really want the retail storefront visibility, in many markets, that's going to be hard to find. Again, if you remember earlier, we talked about zoning and accessibility. If you're a veterinarian, they're not going to let you go on the second floor of a midtown high-rise in New York and have people bringing their dogs and cats and gerbils in the elevator. So a lot of it has to do with where you are and the cost and the zoning aspects of having that office. I talked briefly about the tax ramifications. I'm not a tax accountant. And I would encourage anyone who wants to consider buying versus leasing to talk to their CPA. But like I said, in general, you do get the interest write-off and you do get to depreciate the asset and you do get to build equity. But I don't think you let that be the driving force. The driving force is, do the numbers make sense?